To make certain kinds of formulas clearer in what they're doing, and to provide some good worksheet documentation, giving a cell or a range of cells a range name makes good sense. This formula in cell C2 here is calculating a new salary for the first person here. And there's a reference to cell D1, and it's an absolute reference, so that if this gets copied down the column, it will constantly refer to cell D1. If we see words here instead of an address, it could be a lot clearer. And so what might make sense here is to give a name to cell D1 and then use it in the formula. There are a number of different ways to name a cell, but many times a fast way is simply to click on a cell, and this could in some cases be a range of cells, in this case one cell, click a cell, and then in the name box, which is located to the left of the formula bar, if you just slide over there, it will say name box. Click the drop arrow. If there are other range names in this workbook, you will see them here. A range name cannot begin with a number. It cannot have spaces. You might want to use an underscore to simulate the look of words. You can use upper and lowercase freely. So a name for this cell might be something like percent increase or pay increase percentage, something like that. Probably don't want it too long. I'm going to use percent increase. Enter. Once the name is there, it then can be used in a formula. And so in this formula here, I'm simply going to double click and plug it in right here. Now, it's not that much typing. I could certainly type it. Another option could be to hit the F3 key and all range names will be exposed in a box. We could click on that and click OK. That would put it into place. And a third way, if the cell is nearby as it is here, if we simply click on the cell that has the name, or cells, in some cases, the name pops into place, and we can complete this and then double click to copy this down the column. And every single reference here refers to the range name. Now that's a lot more descriptive than $D, $1. But on the other hand, and this is certainly a downside that you'll see sometimes with range names, the first time you see this, you might not be sure what it means. If you were not the one who has written or created the name, or maybe it's been a long time since you did create it, if you're not always sure where that is, at any time you can click this name box arrow and then click on the name in question, and it will then take you there, so to speak. It makes that become the active cell. Now, a secondary use of range names would be in any worksheet at any time. For example, maybe you're at a different part of a worksheet here and you say, I want to get to that location. You can click that box, click the name in question, and it takes you there. So think of it potentially as a go-to vehicle. That's not its main purpose. Now, one clear downside of range names that I didn't mention, I'm remembering a situation of a year or two ago when someone had sent me a file and I began to see some range names, and then I did click that name box arrow and there were a ton of range names there. And it got really annoying. Every time I went to a different kind of formula, I'd see a different range name, so I had to constantly go back and forth, and figure out where they all were and what they meant. Now you can, in Excel 2007, on the Formulas tab, click the Name Manager button here, and you will, of course here there's only one of them, but you could get the list right here and see them all. That's certainly of value. But when there are many, many of them, it's going to take you a while to absorb the meaning of the names, even when they're coherent. Another situation for the data we see here in columns F through M is that sometimes you can use adjacent labels to name cells. If we were to highlight this data right here, and then use the Create from Selection option, this is in the Define Names group, that's on the Formulas tab in the ribbon, Create from Selection, we see this option. Now, we don't necessarily need to use top row and left column both, but if it does see text, it gives us the options, and suppose we do in this case. You don't need to use both of these. Click OK. By doing this, what we are about to say is that January, for example, is now a range name that refers to cells G2 through M2. That's the 365, the 557, and so on, all the way over to 241. And also, TX, as an example, Texas, refers to all the cells from H2 down to cells H13. So we're talking about the 557, the 786, and so on, reading downward into the 2095. We've just created a lot of range names. And now, anywhere in this workbook, or in any formula that's linked to this workbook, we could be using formulas here and there. For example, someone wants to know the average. Now, this is going to be a little bit more powerful if it's in a non-adjacent location, maybe on another sheet or a different part of this worksheet. But if we want to know the average Texas values here, we could just type in TX. It doesn't have to be capitalized, forget the right parenthesis, just hit enter. And there's that average right there. And we could quickly verify this by highlighting these cells here and then looking in our status bar where it says the average is 1010. Well, that's the rounded version of what we're seeing right here. So that's a good on-screen verifier. So at different times, we can use these labels here in formulas. And in all cases, they will mean, respectively, for example, that's what Ohio means, or OH means, as we use it in formulas and functions. And this is what April means as we use it as well. And we can use that throughout the workbook or in any formula that's linked to this workbook. So I think you can see here pretty clearly that range names certainly have their place, and we have a nice quick method of creating them in cases like the grid we see here. And in the previous example, a way to make certain formulas more understandable or more readable at a quick glance.